Welcome to Albion TV presents the AO Daily Show, your source of real news in an unreal world, keeping you up to date on the latest news, events, and the great community of Albion Online. Today is the 10th of February, 2022. I am your host, the Shozen One, and I am joined today by BigLipsMcGee, who will be joining us for a new player show specifically on solo dungeons. Bogul will be here as well, as he will be working the camera, the knobs, all the levers and such. But mostly this is going to be a show for BigLipsMcGee. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for the amazing intro. That was something. Yeah, I'm BigLipsMcGee. I make YouTube videos and stuff, mainly guides and solo PvP stuff. And I thought we could take a look at some solo dungeons because I constantly find myself telling people to do solo dungeons when they're new players because they're fairly good entry level activity, and they've got some changes recently, so they're more confusing than they used to be.
How so? How are they more confusing? What's been updated in the...
Oh, they changed a lot of things with like the maps and the zones that they can spawn in, and what else they changed recently? The loot a little bit. So we'll be getting into some of that stuff later.
All right, sounds good. I did see that you recently put up a video on the differences between solo dungeons and corrupted dungeons. So
Yeah,
you've definitely been looking at these quite a bit lately.
yeah, that one's actually slightly outdated. It was before the Lands Awaken update, which changed quite a bit. But yeah, it is still relevant. I have done way too many soul dungeons than is good for a human being. I have a series on my YouTube channel where I do loot from 100 or 10 hours or something, and I've done loot from 100 soul dungeons like 8 or 9 times or something. So I have done a lot of soul dungeons in my life, and I probably know way too much about them
Well,
for any sane person.
I was going to say that's fantastic for today because you'll be able to help new players understand some of those mechanics. We've been trying to get someone in who can explain what you need to know when you go into a solo dungeon, but also the most basic things. How do you get to solo dungeons? I see you're out here in the world running around on a very fancy elk.
Yeah, I decided to use the elk because it's the only mount skin that I have. I'm not much of a skin person, but I accidentally redeemed this one, so we thought I'd show it off. But yeah, so I guess that's the first thing, is that soul dungeons will just randomly spawn in any tier 3 to tier 8 zone in the game. And they'll spawn anywhere randomly on the map. You can't see them on your mini map or your big map or anything. They'll just spawn randomly. So you have to go around and walk around and see if you can find one, like I'm doing here, which I'm not having much luck. But yes, they spawn randomly in the open world, and then you can find them. You can also use maps to spawn one directly, but I'll talk about that in a second. So this is a soul dungeon over here. These two rocks with the green glowing stuff coming out of it. And if you dismount and click on it, you just get channeled right into a nice little soul dungeon that you can go and clear.
And this is slightly different than the group random dungeon, which has a different color glow, right? And that's
Yeah,
how
the
you can
group.
differentiate the two of them.
Yeah, so there's one other one that looks very similar to these is actually corrupted dungeons. They'll have the same like rock structure, except instead of it being a little green glow, it'll be like a red glow, and they'll have like demonic inscribings outside of them. You don't really want to go into those because they're sort of for PvP. You'll probably die if you go into it. And then there's also group dungeons. Yeah, those look a little bit differently. They're usually a lot bigger, and they're either like big portals on the map, or they have like little, like actually look like a dungeon entrance with a big entrance of like glow blue or something. So if you want a slow dungeon, small little ones with a little green thing poking out of them, or green light poking out of them. And then once you go into the dungeon, there's a bunch of mobs, as you can see here, and you essentially just clear them. You walk through the dungeon, you clear them. You can't get lost or anything. It is like a one path sort of thing. There's sometimes be a little side rooms for bosses and things like that, but essentially you can just walk through and clear them and kill all the mobs. This one here is a Heretic slow dungeon, so there's 4 factions of mobs, which is kind of interesting. So depending on what dungeon you enter, it'll just randomly generate a faction of mobs. So there's 4 different types. We have Heretic here. There's also Keeper, Morgana, and Undead. So the one we're doing here is Heretic, and these ones are interesting because there's a lot more of these mobs than there are with the other ones. Like generally, like if I go into a room, the amount of mobs in a Heretic dungeon will typically be a little bit higher than the other ones, but they're also a little bit weaker than the other ones, which is sort of nice for speedily clearing dungeons.
Does that give you more experience by having more in the dungeon, or because they're weaker, does it kind of even out?
I haven't like calculated exactly, but I think it does even out a little bit. They do give a little bit less fame per mob than some of the other ones, like the undead ones, especially are sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum that have a lot or a very few amount of mobs that are very high tier or high strength and give you more rewards. But I think it should pretty much even out. It doesn't really matter which dungeon you get into. Their rewards are all pretty much the same. And then
And you said something about like speed clearing for elites. What does that mean? Is that just going from elite to elite there and ignoring all the other ones, or are you trying to just clear them all, but the lower tier ones just make it easier to focus on the elite?
um, yeah, I generally suggest killing them one by one as you go along. There was some older strategies before that you could like skip some mobs and just do the higher tier ones or the stronger ones. But they've mostly tried, like SBI has mostly tried to implement things so that you can't really do that too effectively anymore. They want you to sort of make sure you're clearing all the mobs so you can open the chests and things like that. So I would suggest just going on and killing the mobs one by one as you do the dungeon, as that's generally a better way to do it. And then besides mobs inside the dungeon, there's lots of other things as well. So I just mentioned chests is the main thing that you're sort of going for when you do dungeons, is that there'll be chests. We'll see one coming up on the right here, I believe. There's one over here so we can see in the distance here. There's a chest over here with a mob with a circle under it. So in order to open the chest, you have to kill all the mobs leading up to it, as well as that big boss mob there. So I'll go and do that.
And do you have recommended builds for making this faster so that you can clear these groups very quickly while maintaining a relatively high energy and health level?
Yeah, so solo dungeons are sort of designed to be able to do with whatever gear you want to, as long as your gear is an appropriate tier. So, like if I'm doing a tier 5 solo dungeon, if I have tier 5 gear, I should be able to do it pretty comfortably with no matter what I bring. However, obviously, there are some builds that make things a little bit faster and more efficient. Cloth robes, for example, will give you a higher just damage boost naturally, so you'll clear things a little bit faster. I'm using a cultist robe here, which has an ability to heal me as well as giving me damage, that 50% bonus damage naturally. So I will clear a little bit faster with those. I always recommend leather shoes as well, because those give you refreshing sprint, which can reduce your cooldowns. And then again, some weapons, like weapons that do AoE damage, it is generally a pretty good weapons to bring for soul dungeons to speed things up a little bit, because obviously you're clearing groups of mobs, you want AoE damage rather than something that has like CC or knockback that's typically not going to be quite as efficient.
That's good to know. And what is your tips for doing these? How do you make this like as efficient as possible for the player who's going into them? Because I mean, with a lot of guys who are going into solo dungeons, if they're early in this process, you said they can bring anything they want at all for gear. So as long as it, is functional, like you said, focus on like some DPS stuff there. But what other things do you recommend as far as like potions or food?
Yeah, so it really depends on your build, but for potions and food especially, I would always recommend, I'm using omelets here, but that's just because I have some regeneration in my build. Soups and fish are the number one foods that I would use. They regenerate your health when you're out of combat. So if I do this mob group here and take a bunch of damage, after I kill them, I'll be out of combat. And then if I have some sort of regeneration food, it'll let me heal up faster than I would otherwise. So you can see I'm healing up sort of slowly right now, because I don't have regeneration food. If I was healing, or if I was using a soup, like a cabbage soup, or a fish, like a catfish or something, then that health would go up much faster, allowing you to not really have to worry about taking too much damage when you clear the dungeons. And then for potions, potions don't really matter for soul dungeons, in my opinion. A lot of people use poison potions, which helps with the bosses. Tier 4 poison potions are on like 1,000 silver each, so they're pretty cheap just to throw on bosses and help you clear them faster. Otherwise, I typically bring invisibility potions if I'm in a dangerous zone, just to help me escape, just in case something goes wrong.
And those poisons
Uh,
do really lower the resistances of some of those boss mobs to make them a lot easier to kill.
Yeah, they do damage and lower resistances. So you typically want to throw a poison potion, lower the resistance, and then use your big damage spells on it. Besides that, though, there are a couple things that can help you with getting sort of better rewards while you're doing solo dungeons. So I'm going to go ahead and A out or exit this dungeon here. And the number one thing that I would say that you should do when you are doing solo dungeons is to not do what I just did and go out and find a random dungeon, but instead go to the marketplace and search up for a dungeon map solo and buy one of those and use one of those, because typically they will be worth to use maps rather than just finding random dungeons. Part of the reason is because it's just easier to find a dungeon if you have a map that tells you exactly where it is, and also dungeon maps will give you better rewards.
And
So
is there a way to know when you're ready to go up to the next level of dungeon? Like what levels should you focus on with these maps comparatively to your own level? Because I know that the maps can get a little bit complex. They're not just flat maps.
yeah, so the first thing that you need to make sure that you have that you check is that you have the appropriate Reaver level. So if you open your Destiny board, it's to the very left or on the combat. You're going to go all the way up to like tier. You start at tier 2 Reaver, tier 1 Reaver, all the way up to tier 8. If you're going to do a tier 6 soul dungeon, for example, then you want to make sure you have Master Reaver unlocked, the tier 6 Reaver, because that will allow you to essentially kill the tier 6 mobs much, much easier than you would otherwise. So it's really important they have that unlocked. Otherwise, it's sort of just trial and error. Make sure you have, if you have tier 6 gear and you have tier 6 Reaver, you can probably pretty comfortably do a tier 6 dungeon map, as long as, or yeah, just a normal tier 6 dungeon map. Doing like an exceptional dungeon map is going to be a little bit harder. So if you buy a map on the market, you'll have it in your inventory. And if you click on it, you can essentially use it, and it will spawn one of those dungeons like you just saw me go into in either your zone or one zone away from you as a solo dungeon. So if I'm in town, like right in the middle of Fort Sterling right now, and I use a tier 4 map, it's going to spawn me a dungeon somewhere either to the southeast in Mauer Gorge or the northwest in Pent Ghent, because it's the only tier 4 zones that are within one zone of me.
And so that means that you're going to have a really good idea of where it's going to be very quickly, if you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as soon as you use that map, you'll get like this little indicator on your map, on your cluster map. So you can open up pressing
Okay.
N, and it makes it really easy to see where the dungeon is. It will give you this little like green thing that pretty much says, go over here, and then you can go over there and you can find a dungeon really easily. Now, one thing that you have to be really careful of with maps is that they work differently in the Royal Continent than they do in the Outlands. So in the blue, yellow, and red zones, they work a little bit differently than they do in the black zone. That's one of the more confusing things that they implemented recently. So we're in the Royal Continent right now, and so if you pop a map, it can only spawn in its according tier of zone. So if I pop a tier 4 map, it will spawn in a tier 4 zone. If I
Oh,
pop a
that's
tier
very
5
good to
map,
know.
it will spawn in a tier 5 zone. The only one that's not like that is the tier 7 maps, which can spawn in tier 6 or tier 7 zones. But other than that, they always spawn in their according tier of zone. This is not the same as the black zone.
So
Or
you
the,
don't want to end up with a situation where you're getting a high level map, standing in the city, popping it, and realizing you have to run 5 zones to go there.
Well, yeah, if you do end up in that situation, you try to use the map, it'll actually just say, "Oh, I can't find a zone." Actually, if
Oh,
you're 5
good.
zones away from a zone, it'll be like, "Yeah, sorry, we can't find one." So,
Well,
if
that's good
that's
to know
happening
too.
to
Yeah.
you, yeah, then you just need to know that you need to go and find on your map first somewhere that's close to the tier zone that you need for that map, and then it will work.
Good to know.
One of the things is sometimes there's like two soul dungeons that are right next to each other or something, and you can't figure out which one is your
Which
map
one's
and which
yours?
one's just a random one.
That's an interesting problem to have.
It happens ever so occasionally. If you go into your dungeon and you just you select the first mob on the little buff bar, so right below the health bar of the mobs, if it is a map, it will have this little sword under it as a buff, and it will say enemies in this dungeon are X% stronger. So if it's a normal map, just a flat like 4 map like I'm doing here, it'll say enemies in this dungeon are 16% stronger. And now That's not too much stronger, so you don't have to worry too much about it. And the reason that I like doing maps is because they also give 16% more loot. And so typically 16% loot in a dungeon is more than the cost of the map, which means that it's just generally more efficient to be doing maps than it is to be doing normal dungeons. You'll just make more money. They also give more fame. The chests will have more stuff in them. Pretty much everything is just better if you do maps than if you do normal dungeons. So I would pretty much always suggest doing a map.
And do you find that these random dungeons are better for fame or for silver? What would you say is the main reason to do these as a player? Like, what will they help you the most with?
Yeah, so currently, I would say they're probably a little bit better for money than they are fame, just because there's been some recent updates that have made other activities very good for fame, like doing the mobs just found in the open world is super good for fame, but not quite as good for money. So I would suggest doing these if you want sort of a safe way to make money. This is a pretty great way to do it for a solo player. If you go to my YouTube channel and watch some of my older videos where I go over the loot from 100 of these dungeons, the loot will be probably a little bit less than what I was getting in those because it has been nerfed a little bit since that, but it is still quite good. So I definitely suggest doing this if you want to make some money in a relatively safe way.
Okay, that's interesting to hear because I do know that one of your concerns back then was that you felt there was too much of a loot disparity between solo dungeons and ratting of corrupted dungeons.
Yeah, so very similar to Soul Dungeons, you can go in corrupted dungeons and do them similar to Soul Dungeons, just go for the chests and ignore players and try to make money that way. And yeah, that is definitely going to be a lot better for money specifically, and actually better for fame as well. However, it is going to be significantly more dangerous, especially due to some recent patches making Soul Dungeons safer. Corrupted dungeons are significantly more dangerous than Soul Dungeons, I would say, right now. And so it's sort of the whole risk reward with Albion. If you want to take a risk, you can go and do some corrupted dungeons for some better loot, some better fame. Or if you want to take things a little bit more casual, not take as big of a risk, you can go and do some Soul Dungeons for a little bit less rewards, but a lot safer.
And right now, for like a new player, you would recommend if you're just starting out and trying to get your first, I guess, tiers unlocked, get up to tier 8 and everything and unlock everything, that solo dungeons are a safer, easier way to learn the game and the mechanics of the game rather than jumping into a potential PvP engagement right away.
Yes, yeah, I would say so for sure. Jumping in corrupted dungeons is a little bit daunting for new players sometimes, so I would suggest starting off with some solo dungeons, and then you can move on to them later once you have built up some money from your solo dungeons. Maybe you could try corrupted dungeons if you like that sort of PvP. And now, as I was creating this dungeon, you can see here I've come across this little pool of yellow goodness. This is called a combat shrine, a small combat shrine. You find these in soul dungeons. They'll just randomly be in some runes. Sometimes they're like hidden in little corners, so sometimes you have to go a little bit off the path to look for them. But they'll glow yellow like this, and they have one use. You can drink it, and you'll get one of 3 buffs. So there's white, there's green, and there's red. So I got the red buff. You can see this one makes me super speedy. You essentially move faster, and then you do more damage to mobs with everything, basically, with this red buff. If I were to get the white buff, that gives me energy regeneration, so my energy would go up a lot faster than normal, and it would also give me cooldown reduction, so my skills would come up much faster. And then lastly, there's the green buff. That one would give me health regen, so my health would regenerate pretty fast, even in combat. And then it would also deflect some of the damage that the mobs do to you. So they're all good for different sorts of things, but they'll generally all just help you clear easier by doing more damage or faster cooldowns or making you tankier. Very good buffs to get. All sorts of fun little goodies found inside solo dungeons.
So you definitely want to get those when they're available and make sure you prioritize getting those and using them correctly.
Yep. Yeah. Always take them when available. I usually, if they're in a big room full of lots of mobs, I like to take them before I kill the mobs so that I can use that buff to kill the mobs. Otherwise, if there's only like 2 mobs in the room, I might kill the mobs and then take it so I have more time to kill maybe the next room of mobs with it or something like that.
Okay. So use it as efficiently as possible is what you suggest.
Yeah, or don't. I mean, do what you want.
Do whatever you want. It's a solo dungeon. Nobody's going to see what you do.
Exactly.
And
unless you're
that's
being
one of the
extreme
reasons, like,
challenging.
to do them too, is because you're just not going to get interrupted, and that's very important
Yeah.
early on while you're learning. A lot of people don't necessarily want an audience while they're trying to figure out what they're doing in the game.
Yeah, I certainly don't. Yeah. It looks like we have another chest here coming up. So sometimes chests will have like these little guards too, which is kind of cool. You can see there's like a bridge you have to cross, but you have to kill these dudes. They also spawn the water on you and make it really hard to cross. Really don't like these dudes, but
And would you say that there are some mob types that are just easier, like some of the different solo dungeons that are just easier to do or different? Some are better suited towards silver or fame.
Um, I'd say the biggest difference would be between like weapons. So some weapons deal with some mob types easier than others. So right now we're in the caverns, and the caverns have this one boss that's like a big ogre that constantly smashes you. And so I typically find fighting that one a little bit difficult if you're using like a melee build like I am right now. You might struggle a little bit with the big ogre because he smashes you constantly. But if you're on a ranged build, then you can stay at sort of a range, and he'll typically use some of his other skills instead, which aren't as threatening, so it makes it a little bit easier. So there's not a huge difference between the factions of mobs, but sometimes your build will do a little bit better against some than others, which is sort of nice.
I do have two
Uh,
questions from chat.
Yeah.
Maybe I can jump in here real quick. One of the question was the difficulty of the dungeons. Is it, technically, or, is there a rule saying which one is more valuable or better? Or is it, for example, if you were to compare, say, a 5.1 versus a 5.3 dungeon, is there a reason to do the higher ones? Is that better, quote unquote? Or how do you feel about the
Right.
enchanted versions of the dungeons?
Yeah, so there's 4 different types of map for each tier. There's like the normal ones, the uncommon ones, which are 0.1s, the rares, which are 0.2s, the exceptionals, which are 0.3s. And as you go up, the dungeons get harder, but the loot also gets better accordingly, or the rewards, I should say, not only the loot, so the fame and stuff as well. But also the cost of the maps goes up a lot with that as well. So typically, I would say if you want to be safe, just use the normal ones, as those will pretty much always be worth it in both in terms of fame and loot. But once you start getting up to like the 0.2s and 0.3s, it's typically less silver efficient. So the maps will cost more, which means, yeah, it will cut on your profits a little bit, and it won't give you quite as much efficient loot. However, it does give you more fame. So if you want to do these for a lot of fame, doing the higher, like the 0.2s and 0.3s, is definitely the way to go. You can make a ton of fame doing like 0.3 maps. However, you'll probably won't really make that much profit just due to the fact that the maps will cost quite a bit of silver to purchase. So if you want to stay safe, do the low tier ones. If you want to make money, do the low tier ones. If you want to make a lot of fame, then you can start doing the high enchantment ones, like the 0.2s and the 0.3s.
Okay. Thank you. I see that you're right at the boss here.
Yeah. So eventually the dungeon will end. It usually has 1 or 2 floors. The end of the dungeon is always signified by this little circular thing on the ground here that you can see, a little symbol, and there'll be a boss guarding a chest at the end, and that's the dungeon is at the end.
And then do you know how many different bosses there are?
Oh, not offhand, but the bosses will be different depending on the color of the chest. So you always get either a blue chest, purple chest, or gold chest at the end of your dungeon. A blue chest like this is the most common one, and so it has, I believe, at least 3 variants for at least for the keeper ones like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the purple ones and the gold ones will have the same archetype of boss, although their stats will be a little bit better for the gold ones. And there's like 1 of those or 2 of those. But yeah, there's a couple different bosses.
Right. And then you multiply that by the amount of factions, which is 4 total.
Yeah.
And then you get quite a lot of variety, right?
Yes.
And maybe we can circle back just a little bit on the layout of these dungeons. They are, or I think in the past they got introduced as randomized dungeons. So are these always the same? Do they always have the same layout, or do you have any sort of quick tip how these are structured?
Yeah. So essentially there are rooms that get randomly generated into the dungeon. So there's like probably 30 or 40 rooms, types of rooms for each type or for each faction of mob in the solo dungeon. And basically your solo dungeon will just take one room and then it'll randomly select the next room and so on and so on and so on until it selects a boss room. And then there's a couple different types of boss rooms, like probably 5 or 6 different types of boss rooms, and then the dungeon will end. So essentially, yeah, there's just a bunch of different types of rooms and they all get randomly generated together. So your solo dungeon will never really be the exact same. Although once you do like many of these, you'll start to recognize rooms as similar to ones you've previously done.
I see. How many did you say did you do before you started recognizing them?
Maybe 50 or 60. I don't know.
All right. Okay. That's not bad. I think I like that nature, that roguelike nature of these
Yeah.
different dungeons. Yeah.
It's a lot better than static dungeons that always have the same layout. Makes them more refreshing to do than some of the other ones for sure.
And there was one other question in regards to, of course, the highest tier, the 8.3 solo dungeons. Do you have any comment on these? Because, that's always what people want to know. They want to know, can I make money, and what's the highest possible tier? Is that worth it, or what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, so 8.3 solo dungeons, if you were to do 8.3 solo dungeons like for hours, you would make some insane amounts of fame. They give so much fame per mob. It's like doing solo and group dungeons. You get like more fame than you do just by doing the 8.3s. However, the maps are absurdly expensive, and so you'll probably lose money while doing it. You can obviously get really lucky with the loot because it's 8.3. You get a lot of chances to get some really good loot, so you could get lucky and make money. But most of the time, I would say with like the 8.3s, you're probably not going to make much money.
Do you have a sweet spot?
My favorites are like 6-1s or flat 7s. I think are flat 8s, 8-1s. It's hard to say because when I did them, it was before the Lands Awakened patch where maps got buffed a little bit. So the maps are a little bit more expensive now than they were when I did them. So yeah, I think like flat 7s are still probably some of the best ones to do in terms of money.
Okay. I saw that you were at the Realm Gate, about to go teleport to the Outlands here.
Yes.
I unfollowed you, so you can sort of go there in peace, I suppose. I'll take a quick look at the price of these before I jump back onto you.
Okay. So yeah, so I was just doing maps in the soul dungeons in the Royal Continent there, and that's a good way to get started. However, I would suggest going out into the black or red zone as soon as you feel comfortable doing so, because the rewards are much greater in these zones. So in the Royal Continent, if we look at let's say the chests, for example, if you were to do chests in the blue zone, if I were to do tier 5 or I guess tier 4 solo dungeon in wait, that doesn't make sense. Anyways, tier 5 in the yellow zone. Let's take that example.
Okay, so there you go. You got one.
The chest would give me a 33% loot bonus, which is okay.
That's not too bad. Not too bad.
If I were to go to the black zone and do the same tier 5 soul dungeon, my loot or my chests would be giving me a 160%.
Whoa, that is like 100% better.
Something like that. Yeah, I think that math's a little off, but yeah, it's a lot better.
Yeah, it's way better.
Yeah, so you get much better rewards going in the danger zones where you can die than you do in the zones where you can't die.
And how much more dangerous are those maps in the black zones comparatively? What makes them like more dangerous out there?
Well, comparatively to like the blue and yellow zones, in the blue and yellow you just can't die at all, so there's almost no risk.
There's no risk there.
Yeah, but in the black zone, obviously, if someone kills you, you lose everything and you have to die. But that being said, the black zone, I mean, it's a generally dangerous place. There's always people trying to kill you, but if you get inside a dungeon, then you'll be pretty safe. So as long as you're safe while traveling around, I'd say normally on most trips that you would go during a soul dungeon, you probably won't die unless it's like your first time in the black zone. You have absolutely no idea what you're doing. Then you might die. But other than that, you'll probably be okay in terms of safety.
And are there any tips you would give to make yourself a little bit safer out here in the black zones while doing these dungeons so that you can avoid some of the risks?
Yeah, when you exit through the portals, make sure you always take the little yellow shrines will make you invisible and invulnerable so people can't really see where you're going. And then just make sure you get to your dungeon as fast as possible. The number one thing of soul dungeons is make sure nobody ever sees you enter it. Because if they see you
So,
enter it,
like
there's a good
what
chance to
just
follow you.
happened with you and Bogul showing exactly where you were without
My
covering
Yes.
the
bad. My
map.
bad.
Yes,
I
exactly.
was too
Then
But
early.
okay, no,
but
it's okay.
that is okay because there is a mechanic that they have implemented that makes me I can be 100% safe in this dungeon because as soon as I enter it, a invisible 90-second timer starts, and as soon as that 90 seconds are up, that solo dungeon disappears off the map. And no one will be able to enter it behind me. I'll be completely safe. I can take my time and clear it. So as long as nobody comes in the next, I don't know, 60 seconds or 90 seconds since I've entered it, there's no one like following me as I walked out there on watching the stream, then I'll be fine because they won't be able to, the dungeon won't even be on the map. So there'll be no way for them to come in and kill me.
They would have had to been very quick stream snipers, is what you're saying.
Yes, yeah, they'd have to be right on the money there.
Some of
That
those
being
top
said,
tier stream snipers that we have watching the stream.
yeah, I'm sure that Albion TV gets the best stream snipers.
We generally don't. Our stream snipers find us in the city, take off their clothes, and start dancing.
Those are the type of stream snipers I like. I think Nomad Poncho is streaming like 8.3 in the open world right now, so they might have all gone.
Yeah, that's where they're all there. Yeah, if he's doing that, they're definitely gonna follow him.
Yeah. Going back to the 90 seconds though, I would suggest you can do that if you really don't want to die. However, I would actually suggest to not wait the 90 seconds just because 90 seconds is actually a really long time when you think about it. Solo dungeons typically don't take that long to clear. And so waiting 90 seconds at the start can add like a solid 20% in terms of time onto your clear speed. Like it takes significantly longer to clear if you're spending a minute and a half just chilling at the start. So typically it's actually, I would say, probably more like silver efficient to take the risk and not wait at the start than it is to actually sit there and be safe. Like, because you're really not going to get dove or died that often, as diving has sort of fallen out of the meta or an activity that people like to do. They don't really dive that much anymore.
It's
So
it's
typically
not
still pretty
as
safe.
beneficial as it used to be. There's other ways to get the same thing, but in a much more, I say, just like attainable, regularly repeatable way. Like as
Yes,
people are
yeah.
living out there in the open world now, you find a lot more people killing stuff in the open world, and tracking has become more valuable
Yeah,
than
exactly.
just going into dungeons, because you really either have to get super lucky with the dungeon and go in and see somebody literally go in, or go into one right after somebody got there, and the chance of that happening are really slim.
Yeah, exactly. So I used to dive dungeons to find some people to kill, and I don't do it anymore at all, just because yeah, it's pretty unlikely that you'll find someone. So typically, you'll be pretty safe once you get inside the dungeon. It's interesting that they mentioned the open world mobs as well, because those recently got changed, and a lot of people are moving away from soul dungeons to do those instead. Which I think is pretty good because they give a lot more fame than you would get inside a dungeon if you were to go out in the open world and kill some of the mobs out there. However,
It's more dangerous.
much more dangerous. Yeah,
I mean, in the yellow zones, it's not. And I mean, when I have, honestly, when I have some downtime, generally, like I'm out there roaming the yellow zones and popping some mobs for free fame, because when they evolve or get that colored glow around them, they're worth a lot, even in the
yeah,
yellow
they really
zones.
are.
So it's really worth doing. And you can, with the way you can demount now and instantly have access to skills, you can hop off, kill a group of 3, hop back on in 15 seconds and be gone. And that's really cool. And it's a great way to get fame very quickly. And you don't have as much downtime as you do in a lot of other gameplay modes. And if if you have the unlocks, you can, instead of having to rely on the mobs themselves for silver and rewards, you can just pluck off those point 1, point 2 resources. And you're
Yeah,
gonna make quite a bit if you instantly go back to town and throw it up on the auction house and just ignore everything else. Just go back out, pop a bunch of evolved mobs. It's not too shabby. I'd
Yeah,
actually
for
like to
sure.
see like these dungeons once again find a good niche, like something that they excel at as far as giving silver or fame or providing safety. And it'd be nice to see some slight adjustments in there because they're fun.
Yeah, I do think they fit. I think the changes to the maps actually made them fit a lot better than they used to, because they are pretty safe now. If you have, especially like if you join a guild that has an HQ out in the middle of nowhere in the black zone, and you're just popping maps out there, like you're not gonna encounter many people, and you can. Oh, I forgot to go over maps in the black zone, but yeah, you can like pop tier 8 maps and just constantly do them from relatively safe zones. Um, and yeah, it's just really good in terms of safety. So I do think that's sort of where Soul Dungeons fit in right now.
Okay. So everything is kind of finding a place in your mind. Things are kind of
Yeah,
working out. I have noticed from a lot of people's perspective that Albion overall, the open world and the leveling up process, if you will, is in a better place than it's ever been before, as well as just the open world in general, like for PvP and for PvE.
yeah. The Lands Awakened patch that brought big changes to the open world. That was definitely a very good change in terms of open world gameplay. Really brought a lot, especially for groups to go out and get objectives and stuff in the open world. So, but
And
you know,
uh, uh,
dungeons.
um, So I know this isn't the topic of today's show, but we just mentioned something, their group activities. Would you say that it's more profitable to do group activities as a player right now, or when you're leveling in that early game process, is it better to just go solo and get the spec you need for the weapons you want to use?
Yeah, so what I always say is that group is technically better if you just compare like the raw numbers between how fast you can like level up and stuff when you're with a group than if you're with a solo. Sorry, if you're as a solo player, it's better as a group. That being said, in reality, it's typically I've found to be less, just because there's so much setup time and stuff. If you go to a group dungeon, you have to wait for everyone to get geared. You have to figure out what role everyone's going to play. There's so much hassle in getting everyone set up. If you have like an hour to play, you can't really afford to wait 25 minutes to get everything set up, right? You kind of want to get out there and start doing things. And that's, I think, where solo play really shines, because you don't have to wait for anything. You don't have to wait for anyone. Just pop on your favorite set of gear, buy a map off the market, and you're getting started in 2 minutes, right? So I think in reality, it's, depending on your situation. If you have a really good group of friends that can get geared up really fast, group stuff's really good. If you don't, then you're probably going to be better sticking to solo stuff if you don't have that much time to spend setting up and waiting for people to get ready.
That's a really good point there. Oftentimes people don't take into consideration the amount of time it takes to set up these group activities when you could just get out there right away and grind it yourself.
Yeah.
That said, the best rewards in the game are out there behind group activities.
Yes. Yeah. Albion's definitely a group game at heart. It's always best with friends if you have people to play with and challenge some of the bigger dungeons and bigger mobs, world
Does,
bosses,
does
things
it
like
make
that. Always
sense to
good.
bring a friend to solo dungeons?
Yes and no. So yeah, you can clear faster. You can be a lot safer, but I've heard, I'm not like 100% sure on this. Obviously, I don't have access to the code, so I'd have to look. But I've heard that the loot that you get if you open a chest with 2 people is worse than you get if you open one with one. So, like, if you were to get 100K in a chest as a one-man person, if you do it with 2 people, you'd get like 95K in the chest or something instead. Like, it's overall a little bit worse opening with 2 people, although I'm not 100% sure on that. Although, from what I've seen and what I've heard, I think it is true. So, uh, really depends on personal preference. It's probably more like strictly efficient to do it as a solo player, but obviously if you have more fun playing with friends, like, and you only have 2 people, you can't really do group stuff that easily. Like, it's completely fine doing a solo dungeon as 2 people. Like, don't feel bad about it, or don't feel like you're losing out too much. It's really not a big deal. Once you start getting like 3 or 4 people, then I'd say, okay, you probably want to move on to something different. But 2 people is a pretty good spot for a solo dungeon still. We've also come across the last of the sort of special things that you can find inside a solo dungeon. So this is also called the Shrine for whatever reason. Although it's much different from the buff shrines than we had before. Actually, not that much different, because it does give you a buff. But basically, when you kill the boss that's guarding it, this shrine will activate similar to the buff shrines. And when you drink it, it will give you one of 2 buffs for 200 seconds. So the first buff will boost your fame when killing mobs by 40%, I believe.
That's
Yep,
great.
40%, which is pretty cool. And the other one will give you more silver, like these silver drops on the ground will be boosted by 200%. And now the weird thing with this one, okay, I got the silver one. So instead of it making it so that the mobs drop more silver, it actually just makes it so that whenever you pick up silver, it just multiplies that by like 3 or 4 or something. I don't know the exact number. So it's actually better to just leave silver on the ground like I did here when you see one of these shrines. On the off chance you get the silver buff, when I pick up the silver now, I'm just going to be getting more, even though I didn't have the buff when I killed the mobs.
Oh, that's a good tip.
It's very good. It actually makes the silver worth picking up in these dungeons, because typically it's pretty low, the amount of silver you get from the mobs when it drops. But if you have this buff, it's actually quite high. Like I'm in a tier 7 dungeon right now, and I'm getting around 2,000 silver every time I pick up one of those little piles that with this buff on. So it's quite good.
All right. So we've gone over quite a bit about these solo dungeons. Is there anything else that you think players should know before we start answering just questions from chat for the last part of the show here?
Let me look at the little things I wanted to cover. Oh, right, maps. We forgot to go over maps in the Black Zone. So I said they worked when I went over maps in the Royal Continent, so the blue, yellow, and red zones. I said they worked a little bit different in the Black Zone. So in the Black Zone, when you pop a map, it can spawn in its tier of zone or anything lower. So if I pop a tier 7 map, it can spawn in a tier 7 zone, a tier 6 zone, or a tier 5 zone. If I use a tier 8 map, it's tier 8 or anything lower. If I use a tier 5 map, then it's tier 5 or only tier 5. So it makes it really good for doing like high tier maps in low tier zones out in the middle of nowhere, right? You can go in the portal zone, even though tier 8 zone is going to be like 6 zones away from you, you can pop a tier 8 map right in the portal zone, which is only like tier 5 and 6 zones, and you'll still be able to spawn a dungeon there, which is really nice. Makes it a lot safer too. If you have a hideout somewhere at the edge of the map and a tier 5 zone, you can do tier 8 maps all the way from there without having to travel all the way to tier 8 zone.
Well, that's very good to know there, because oftentimes in the Outlands, when you join like a guild or whatever, you're going to have yourself a hideout, and you can just go right outside your hideout, spawn the map, and then just a couple of zones away at most, you're going to have a zone to go to in a dungeon.
Exactly, yeah, and a safe spot. If you see some gank, you just turn around and go to your hideout again. Spot to store loot. It's very good. Yeah, solo dungeons definitely shine when you have like a hideout or something that you can sort of use. If you don't have a hideout, you're not part of a guild, you can also use some of the chests out in the Outlands. They're called Outlands chests. You can just buy a tab for like 200k and put your loot in there, so you don't have to risk it while you're running around. Go out with some special transporting gear.
That's probably a little bit safer than the cities, the little towns out there in the Outlands, because there's a lot of activity around those. And if you're a solo player around those cities, you're gonna make friends fast, especially if you don't have a guild. Like, the people will follow you.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of gankers around those towns too, so you do have to be very careful. If you're wondering about money as well, I only did one dungeon here, but I made probably around 150, 200k from this tier 7 dungeon. So it's pretty quick money, pretty easy. You get a lot in silver bags too, which covers the cost if you die as well of your gear and stuff. So it's pretty decent.
And it was a pretty safe environment. You got a lot of fame, and you were able to go through it pretty quickly while doing something else at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, you could be watching Netflix on your other monitor or texting your friends, whatever. It's pretty chill.
And that's something I do not recommend doing under most circumstances in Albion.
Yeah, especially in the Black Zone.
Right, because you're going to be drawing, like, you're going to have people around you at all times, and you never know when Albion goes from 0 to 60 very quickly.
Yeah.
You're alone, you're just picking up some stone. The next thing you know, you're riding on your terror bird for your life as you're getting chased by 15 people who are like, ha ha ha, look at that guy. He's got something I want.
That is the thrill of Albion, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's
I do
very
have
active.
one other question. In the game, there is something that's called a satchel of insight, and
Yes.
maybe we can talk about that in the context with solo dungeon as well, because it's a bag, right? You can equip it, and one of the abilities on there is that you can get more combat fame for using up some of your silver. So you're trading additional silver for additional fame when you do any activity that gives you fame. So solo mobs or solo dungeons would fall into that category. Do you have an opinion on using or not using Satchels of Insight with solo dungeons?
Yeah, so I actually relatively recently did a video comparing Satchels of Insight and Tomes of Insight and auto respec, which you can turn on to get essentially more fame for silver. They all do essentially the same thing: spend silver, get more fame. So if you want like a detailed answer, I'd suggest watching that. Otherwise, Satchels in particular really shine when you are not 100 in any of the gear you're wearing. So 100 mastery or 100 specialization. It's very good at being very silver efficient and very good for boosting your fame and getting it up much faster when you're not like very far, right? When you're not like max spec in your gear. Once you start getting a lot of hundreds in your gear, the silver becomes less and less efficient the more hundreds that you have. And so if you're like max spec, max mastery in everything that you're wearing, a satchel becomes essentially more expensive than something like a Tome of Insight would be to use. So if you're starting off and you have the money to spare to level up faster, then I would 100% suggest using a satchel. It's very good for that sort of like 20 spec to 100 spec journey.
I like that answer.
I like it too. I think I'm going to have to remember that. I've still got some stuff I have to level. I haven't leveled everything up yet. Got some stuff to do. Haven't never really touched those daggers.
I do
Daggers,
see a few questions in chat. So I think we can open it up for a few questions from chat and then wrap it up in about, 10 minutes or so.
Sounds good.
All right. All right. Best build for speedrunning dungeon. Let's go immediately to the most efficient. Discard everything we just said. Just give me the most efficient TLDR.
Most efficient. I have not tested this last balance patch, which changed like the Great Axe, which used to be the best, wasn't the best for a while. It got buffed again, so it might be the best. I don't know. Spiked gauntlets also have a lot of damage to mobs. I was using them there. You could see I could kill mobs very quickly. Before that patch, I do know that the best weapon was the light crossbow. It has the Q ability explosive bolt as well as the passive well prepared, which is essentially just means you have a ton of consistent AoE damage and you can clear things very, very quickly with the light crossbow. Along with that, leather shoes are always the best to go with refreshing sprint, get your abilities up faster. Robe for the light crossbow specifically, the druid robe is really good because you can stack up that passive on your druid robe very quickly, get lots of damage, especially on things like bosses. Helmet, I believe Stalker Hood was the fastest. You want some damage. If you don't want to use Stalker Hood, pretty much any damage on your hood is going to be fastest. So Stalker Hood's good. Cowl of Purity and what's that cloth one? Cultist Cowl. That's the one that does a lot of damage to mobs. All of those are good for your helmet. Cape. Tavern Cape's always the best. Chain Lightning does a bunch of damage freely on your auto attacks every 15 seconds. And then for the fastest, you're always going to be chugging energy potions whenever they're off cooldown, the high tier energy potions, rather than using something like a Scholar Cowl, which is a nice cheap option to get energy. Running energy potions is technically the fastest, although it does cost a lot of money when you need to use like tier 6 energy potions constantly on cooldown. Gets to be a little bit expensive, but it is the fastest. And then for that, you use just regeneration food like soups and stuff because that will help you. You don't have any like regen in your build naturally, so you do need to bring something to help regen health between the mob groups.
And if that was too fast, you can pause and rewind.
Yeah, or you could just go to my YouTube channel. And look up
or
solo
that,
jungles.
yeah. youtube.com/BigLipsMcGee.
Yeah, definitely check him out there. I was there earlier today watching a bunch of videos as I went around and did some solo dungeons myself.
Any more questions from chat? Let's see. If you guys have any others or tips that you want to get on the show, feel free to put it in chat.
Yeah, I'm also pulling raffles right now, so do pull raffles. And Bogle, you know what we could do while we're waiting for questions?
Do the buffs
Never mind, we
work
have one.
outside of the dungeons as
questions.
well? Is a question.
Ooh.
I mean, I think technically, but practically they're limited to like 2 minutes, right? The shrines you can get.
Yeah, I think. Well, isn't the top one 200 seconds?
Yeah, so the silver and fame one is 200 seconds, and the combat ones, I believe, are 60 seconds.
Because I do remember somebody talking about, going into a dungeon using a shrine and then shrieking people, but the reality is that this is like a very circumstantial, hard thing to pull
Yeah,
off.
you can do it. Yeah, you do have to be lucky though.
Yeah. Is it
Unknown is a little confused. The moderator deleted your message because you're entering the raffle. All raffle messages are deleted. It means you've been entered in the raffle. You're fine.
Do you have an opinion on best mage weapon for solo roaming in the open world, which is a little different, I suppose? I mean,
open world. Probably some sort of frost staff, I would imagine, as they're pretty quick once you get that cast speed up. One-handed frost is always a great answer to any question because it's just a really good weapon. Yeah, probably one-handed frost staff. You have a little bit of mobility with the blink on your W, and then the E is a short cooldown. Get those Qs rolling out real fast. A lot of damage. Probably one-handed frost.
Nice. And what do you think of the new longbow for these dungeons?
Better than it was, but bows have a problem where their Q abilities, which is one of the main ones that you use to clear dungeons a lot of the time, aren't the best at PvM, like killing mobs. They're okay, like they're not bad by any means. And longbow is definitely like a good weapon for clearing soul dungeons. You can definitely use it very successfully, and it'll be good. It'll be pretty fast, but it's not quite as fast as some of the other ones that have more consistent AoE damage, like crossbows.
I think this one might be a question for Bogle. Beat mount for gathering in BZ. What mount you use to transport between royal cities and Carleon?
the beat mount. I mean, it's a rough question because some of it depends on your bank roll. And the actual, I think, best answer is not about the mount, but about getting a scout or a friend. Because somebody who has really low tier and just goes, 2 screens ahead of you is oftentimes better than anything else that you can use gear-wise, I would argue. But that's a different topic, I feel like, than solo dungeons to a degree. So I don't want to go into a 15-minute tangent on that. Do you have an opinion
Grizzly
on that?
bear. It's definitely grizzly bear. The thing is OP.
Grizzly bear?
Yeah. It's real. After the buffs, it is way too tanky and way too fast.
Bogle's looking it up right now.
I believe it's one of the monthly reward mounts, so it stays relatively cheap because there's a lot in the game, and it is got some.
So
great
it's not the
stats.
tier 5 Fort Sterling one; it's a different one, right?
No, not the winter bear. The grizzly bear. I believe it's called grizzly bear. Could be wrong. The polar bear. No, definitely do not use the polar bear. That's my opinion. Polar bear is very weak. The elite polar bear is pretty strong, but the normal tier 5 one is pretty weak.
I'd really like to see a change to those faction mounts to be more useful as a mount that you actually get off and it is used to get off. Right now, I feel like it's too expensive to be something that you gain the benefit of when you get off.
Doesn't that put you in combat if you use the skill?
Yeah.
The grizzly bear, the aura, yes. The aura puts you in combat, but the move speed does not.
I see. All right. General question: how can I level up my daggers fast? I did some dungeons, but it didn't level up fast.
Fastest
Oh.
leveling up is always the open world. If you want fame, go kill some mobs out in the run around, kill some mobs with some daggers.
Yeah,
That'll be the
black
fastest.
zone, demounting on like glowing mobs, getting back on, demounting on glowing mobs, getting back on, demounting on glowing mobs. With Dagger, you should be able to grind through those very individual mobs very quickly. Avoid groups as the Dagger, I would say, or try to peck them off one at a time. But yeah, those glowing mobs are fantastic for fame right now.
Yeah, for daggers, I like the one-handed dagger. If you're doing like sort of the glowing mobs and the bosses, and then the new demon fangs, very good for groups as well. It does a lot of damage.
There you go. Again, like I said, I have not really done much on the Dagger. I have a lot of leveling to do on that. Maybe I'll go do that. All right. Any other questions there, Bogle?
No, I think we're done. I think it's time to talk about raffles, talk about tomorrow's shows and the weekend, and then plug the YouTube channel once more.
I think we have one more question, but it's not about solo anything. Well, I guess it is. What is the best dagger for ganking? I guess that'd be like solo ganking, because if they're just one dude.
Yeah, Bloodletter and Claws are the two ganking daggers, I would say. Bloodletter is definitely better for solo and more versatile. Claws are pretty good if you're with a group.
This is a question for Bogle. Is AOTV the best TTV ever?
Sure, yes. I'm also paid to say that.
Good job, sir. You get to keep your paycheck this week. All right. Well, I'm going to pull a couple more raffles here. Enter the raffle. This is your final chance. We will be back tomorrow with another daily show. We'll be going over the new patch as well as some community events and getting ready for the final week of the season, probably going over a little bit of the season rankings. But as you may have noticed, we have not had any war reports this week. Our good friend Robin Hood RS has COVID currently and has a very sore throat, so he's not very interested in doing play-by-play. But he does feel like he will be getting better, so maybe on Saturday we will have the return of Robin Hood RS after a short, brief time away.
Sorry.
Bogle?
It's your chance to one more time take the spotlight and tell us about your channel before we bid the people goodbye, I think.
Well, if you head on over to www.youtube.com/c/BigLipsMcGee, you can find some nice Albion Online videos. Lots of nice guides and informational videos. If you want to learn more about solo dungeons and what I think of them and corrupted dungeon and all that stuff, got plenty of videos on that, as well as some solo PvP you can check out. And yeah, I hope to see you as a new subscriber there. Also, if you want free stuff, check out any of the Albion Online content creators, and we get free stuff from SBI that we get to give to you, just like this raffle here. So you can follow us, follow me, and get some free stuff.
Yeah, you've got some really good content there, and you are very regular with your content. You keep it updated consistently. I did enjoy all of the videos that I watched, and I do really recommend that one where you were killing everybody in the yellow zone using faction warfare and just a fun build to kill people for faction points. You were getting quite a bit of money and points through that, weren't you?
Yeah, surprisingly good for being safe.
Safe, he says, as he goes out and PvPs for points. It's safe.
Well,
safe.
if I die, then I don't lose my stuff. So
It's true, because it's that great yellow zone faction warfare, and
exactly.
I definitely recommend that if you're trying to learn how to open world PvP and prepare to be involved with some of that style, which you may see a lot of the content creators of Albion do. That's a great place to practice. And BigLipsMcGee gave some great tips on how to do that in that video. So check that out. And all of his other videos too. So thank you again, BigLipsMcGee. I really enjoyed having you on the show today. You did a great job.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely be doing it again soon. So thank you very much.
Cool.